I'm Lynn Fraser. I'm here with the Kilby Center for Recovery, interviewing Tommy Rosen of Recovery 2.0. And I'm really excited to meet you, Tommy, and to do the interview, partly because we have a connection through yoga and meditation traditions, and also because I've followed your work in recovery for a long time. And I'm always impressed by the depth that you go to and the authenticity and the honesty. So I'm really looking forward to this.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. And in the summit, what we're looking for is to go to the roots of addiction and the roots of recovery. And so you're a perfect fit for this.
My name is Tommy Rosen. I'm a yoga teacher. Well, I'm a human being first. Yoga teacher also. Person in long-term recovery. My recovery date was original days at June 23rd, 1991. So I've been on that path for a long time, continuously. I'm the founder of Recovery 2.0, the author of a book by the same name. The work that I do in the world is to bring the power and the beauty of yoga and meditation, nutrition, health, and well-being to people on a path of recovery, to their families, and to work with professionals in this field of recovery to help them have more of an edge, more empowerment on the side of uplifting the people they work with. That's a little bit about me.
Well, that's great. Thank you. Maybe we could jump right in there in terms of what you bring to the field of recovery. So I know you were involved with 12-step work as well, and there's a spiritual component to 12-step. And with yoga and meditation, there's an obvious spiritual component as well. And over the last several years, it seems like there's more of an openness in the addiction recovery field to working with yoga, meditation, working more in the body. What's your experience with that?
Yes. To all who are watching this, if you hear a doggy in the background, I apologize in advance. There's nothing that I can do about that. But to answer your question, I'm looking at addiction as a dis-ease rather than a disease, a dis-ease that affects the mind and the body, the spirit. It skews our relationships with people. It skews our relationship with ourself. It skews our relationship with the Creator, the divine, spirit, whatever your conception of that might be. It skews our relationship with time. It skews our relationship with food. It skews our relationship with money. Pretty much when you have this thing, it's a very unbalanced, very limited, sort of low-grade way to experience life. Very painful. There's great frustration that goes along with addiction because one feels there's so much possibility and so much opportunity for me, but I never seem to realize it. And that's so frustrating. Pain at the level of the family and loved ones who watch somebody hurt themselves time and time again, whether that's drugs and alcohol or any other addictive behavior. You asked, what do I bring to the field of recovery? Well, first of all, I stand on the shoulders of masters, people who have come before, teachers who have come before, without whom I couldn't possibly be here. And I couldn't have an inkling. So anything that I have to say now that's of value is because of them. So what we're all bringing to this field of recovery is a greater sense of what addiction is, an expanded perspective upon it, not just looking at it as a substance misuse or, substance misuse disorder, right? Not just any particular addictive behavior, but really looking at it from an expanded perspective of addiction is a state of being, much the way yoga is a state of being. Yoga is the state of being of oneness, of union. And addiction is the state of being of separateness and confusion. So helping people have an expanded perspective on addiction is very, very important because it starts to it starts to show what addiction is and how it happens, how it gets a foothold in a human being, and most importantly, how to heal from it, how to release addiction and move towards full recovery, health, well-being, optimal health. In addition to an expanded perspective on addiction, we want to understand that when you approach recovery seriously, you have to approach it at all levels of being. Addiction, as I said, affects us on all levels, mind, body, spirit, and beyond. Our recovery path, therefore, has to take into account these levels of the human being. We have to work with the mental body. We know that the mind is a plague to the person stuck in addiction. We know that. We know the body holds and carries energy, memory from the past, trauma, negative impressions left in the tissues of the body, in the cells of the body. And to sincerely desire recovery, which means to become fully present, one is going to have to release the past. At the level of the mental body, we have to release the stories that we held. We have to release resentment. We have to release memory and trauma. Also at the physical level. 12-step recovery helps us a lot to build a new story and to build a new relationship. It does not, however, treat the physical piece of addiction.
Right.
So where the body has to release stuck energy, that's not a protocol that's contained within 12-step work. So one has to look elsewhere to find a solution there. On the spiritual plane, the 12 steps work very powerfully there. A spiritual approach that lasts forever. Not that the 12 steps don't last forever, but the 12 steps typically treat people the same regardless of what stage of recovery they're at. What I mean by that is different people need different things at different times. But the 12 steps and 12-step society doesn't necessarily embrace that idea. Whereas the path of yoga is, by nature, it recognizes the evolutionary process of the human being, that process never ends. Mm-hmm. That one day at a time is true for everybody, whether they've ever struggled with addiction or not. And you never graduate. You just keep going. So expanded perspective on addiction must also have expanded perspective on the treatment of addiction as you approach recovery, desiring to reach long-term sustainable recovery, which has to involve fun. It has to involve contentment. It has to involve connection. Because life is challenging for everybody. And we're going to need not just to be in stress and to be anxious all the time, we're going to need to have a lot of fun. Otherwise, what's the point?
Right. Yes.
So it's good to remember that. That's somehow, we take it so seriously. Sometimes we forget, oh, wait, let's just do something just for the sake of having fun. That's a good thing. That's a beautiful thing.
So the first two principles in yoga are ahimsa and satya. You could say non-harming, compassion, kindness, and truthfulness. How do those relate to recovery and addiction?
Well, when we talk about ahimsa or non-harming, most folks immediately go to the idea of not wanting to hurt another human being. The extension of that is not wanting to hurt other creatures. So it begs an investigation of one's diet. It begs an investigation of one's sort of approach to the world. And by the way, I don't have any judgment about what somebody else should be eating. Mm-hmm. Everybody should make that decision up for themselves based upon the needs of their body, based upon their history and their choices to this point. But it's a good investigation, right? So the part of ahimsa that most people forget about or overlook is harm to oneself. So if we're caught in a addictive cycle, an addictive behavior, it's impossible to live up to the ideal of ahimsa because we're hurting ourselves. Maybe it's subtle. Certainly if you're a heroin addict, cocaine addict, a serious drug addict, an alcoholic, certainly if you're any of those things, you're hurting yourself in pretty dramatic and obvious ways. But with gambling, obviously that's also very painful. Sex addiction, very painful. Food addiction, very painful. Codependency, very painful. All of these things are more explicit. But what about negative thinking? What about self-doubt? What about resentment that you carry? You think, when you're in resentment, you think, I don't have any choice. I have to hold this. I don't know how to let this go. But it is a choice. And because it's a choice, that rolls it right into the addictive sort of possibilities, in my opinion. So when we think about ahimsa and non-harming, the first thing we have to do is to start to be kind to ourselves in our mind. My teacher would say, don't complete a negative sentence about yourself in your head. Now, that's not the easiest thing to do, especially when you've behaved very poorly and you may carry a lot of guilt and shame, low self-esteem, and a very poor feeling about yourself. But you have to begin somewhere and just say, well, I may not know the answer today, but I trust there is an answer, and I've been challenged in so many ways, and I'm going to give myself a break and say, you know what, Tommy? It's okay. You're trying your best, and you can do better. And surround yourself with support, and it's okay. And you'll find a way through. That's a wonderful approach toward ahimsa as you get on this path of recovery.
And there's so much shaming and stigma that the culture puts on people with addiction. It's not surprising that we're doing that to ourselves as well.
Not surprising at all.
Yeah.
I think we're very hard on ourselves, and I think we're very hard on each other. Somehow we forget that everybody makes mistakes. Somehow we forget that everybody has lied. Everybody has stolen. Everybody has cheated at some point, somewhere. That these are human things. None of us are perfect. And so we forget that. And even that the judgmental part of ourselves when we judge others. There's a harm in that too, even though it's subtle. And if you are tuned into it, the way you'll feel it is it'll come with a hangover right away. A little energetic hangover, like, oh, something's wrong. What's wrong? Oh, I was just speaking really poorly about someone.
Right.
And I don't feel good about it. So that's a form of harm. Anyway, important to consider ourselves as a member of the universe, that in active addiction, we cannot live up to this ideal. And when we get onto the path of recovery is the first time we really can look at ahimsa and say, okay, let me try. Let me try to be kinder. And then you have satya, truthfulness, non-lying. Here also, the primary relationship with oneself. Learning to be, in 12-step speak, we would say learning to be rigorously honest. It's rigorously honest with yourself. How am I? Have I slowed down enough to look and to be able to answer that question? What's working in my life? What's not working in my life? What are the things that are creating stress for me? If I have anxiety, where's that coming from? If I catch myself being negative, where's that coming from? How honest can I be in the self-inquiry that is required in this life? Not required in recovery, required in life, period. Otherwise, you just sort of float along. And I suppose that's fine for some people. Fine meaning they feel comfortable with it. But I would not feel comfortable with that myself at this point. Because as things start to happen and feelings start to surface and I start feeling, off or out of alignment, the inquiry must take place so that I can learn from being out of alignment. Otherwise, we do things like repeat mistakes. And they get a little more severe, I have found, as we go along.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't mind saying.
So there's a point. I mean, this takes so much courage to be honest with ourselves and to really look. And I mean, that's part of the reason why the kindness and the compassion is so important, to be doing those together. What's your sense of around the question of readiness? What is it that allows someone to go, okay, I'm ready now. I'm going to look. I'm going to get on the path of recovery. Because so often people back away. It's too much.
Mm-hmm. I think, if one investigates the moment of grace or a moment of pivot or a moment of leverage or a shift in a person's life, what led to that shift, that person being able to make such a powerful shift? They were thinking this way and then they thought that way. They were doing things this way and then they were able to change and do things that way. What leads to that? I mean, generally speaking, there are exceptions. Generally speaking, it's pain.
Right.
Suffering. At some point you're like, I don't desire to continue this anymore. I don't know what else to do. I'm going to need a lot of help and I'm scared. But I don't desire this to be the way it's been anymore. I want to change. And bit by bit, if you have support, especially, and you're able to be honest and lean into that support, you can make it through the spiritual transformation that we're talking about and the life transformation that we're talking about. But to be under the delusion that it could take place alone, by yourself, is just, that's where people back away. They're not in the habit of picking up the phone and saying help. Or if they're willing to do that, they think they only do that when it's the most dire of circumstances. Mm-hmm. But what if it's just, I'm having a hard day and I want to talk to somebody about it?
Our personal experience and even research shows us that connection with other people is really essential for a happy life, let alone for recovery. And so many people have been traumatized at the hands of other people. So they just don't trust. What would you say to someone in that situation where they know that they need to reach out, but they just don't feel like they can?
I think there's a point at which a person comes to where they're in a distrusting state, hard to let others in because they've been hurt. They don't feel it's safe. And I think the only thing that really does that is love and connection from somebody. That somebody could be a therapist or a sponsor or a yoga teacher or a coach or a family member or a friend. But it's a consistent rebuilding of trust, which can really only take place through a consistent relationship with somebody. And so I think that's required. It's not enough to just sort of, well, I went to a meeting and I had coffee after that meeting with somebody and didn't really see them again, but it was a nice feeling. Okay, great. And what about the consistent day in, day out community that allows a person to feel love, redevelop trust, heal from past trauma, and be directed and have a source of inspiration and education from other people who have been where you are before you were there. So also getting around examples of victory. seems to be very, very important on this path.
There's some sense of it's possible.
Right. There has to be a sense of it's possible, and there has to be, I think, a consistency. That's why we talk about 90 meetings in 90 days, or going to therapy twice a week, every week, or staying in these new routines of building relationship. You know, it can happen with a therapist, or it can happen with a massage worker. You know, I mean, it's like any healer that you connect with once a week, like that has been a piece of my recovery.
Man, mine too. Mm-hmm.
Chiropractic or massage work, craniosacral stuff. You know, somebody putting their hands onto your back, onto where you're holding memory, and kneading it out and releasing it. Like, I mean, what a beautiful, amazing thing that you're not necessarily even talking to them, but there's a transference of positive energy. And if you were to do that once a week or once every 2 weeks even, there's a consistency that builds up. And I think that helps a person to heal an inability to trust.
And we have that direct experience of being safe with another person.
Exactly.
Is that a lot of what happens in the 12-step group?
The consistency is, you know, obviously depends on a person's willingness to participate. But yes, absolutely. You know, you get together with a group of guys, usually for men, and a group of women, usually for women, and you start to develop a community of people, and you're all sort of getting better. You're getting better at this together, growing together. You're leaning upon each other. You can sort of count on seeing each other at certain meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something really beautiful and valuable in that. Those are the momentum. Get some momentum, exactly. And begin to develop some new friendships and new relationships that aren't based upon drugs or alcohol or the way things used to be.
So meditation, knowing ourselves.
Yes.
Can you just talk about that a bit? It's a big topic, and I'm not even sure where to zero in on that, but it's just such a key component to recovery.
One of my teachers, Anand Mehrotra, who I love, who's a wise man in India and a loving, fun-loving and life-loving and human being-loving person, he says meditation is a personal responsibility to the world, not even to yourself. It's a responsibility to the world that you meditate every day. If you really believe that what happens in the inner world mirrors or creates what happens in the outer world, and begin to make that intellectual leap to understand what he's talking about. If you're not tending to the inner world, you're not tending to the outer world. And so your responsibility would be, how can I bring balance, dignity, grace, kindness, awareness to what I'm doing in the world? And look, some days go better than others.
Right.
Even when you're meditating, some days go better than others. But the meditation process of connecting with your own consciousness, of getting to know your own consciousness rather than relating to your thoughts all the time, I see it as a responsibility also. And it's an absolute game changer. Everything changes in that practice. Everything changes about your perspective on the world and your place in it. So, you know, in terms of forms, well, there's 1,000 forms of meditation.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to do that.
Sure. And there's, you know, there's certainly not one right way. But it's so important that people on a path of recovery start to use meditation, that this incredible tool is going to be one of the most important tools in your life. And there's no way to describe it to you or to show you. You have to see for yourself. You know, we all know that meditation reduces stress. That right there is enough.
That's a good enough reason. Yeah.
What more do you need? What more do you need?
So when you're dealing with people with addiction in particular, but really with a lot of people in our culture, there's so much toxicity in the mind. There's so much negative thinking and catastrophic thinking and all of that. Would you recommend that people do some kind of practice like yoga and then moving into breathing, relaxation before they do meditation? Or do you think they should just start right away and do some meditation right from the beginning?
It always depends on the person.
Mm-hmm.
There's not one prescription, but I would say for me, I have a much easier time sitting after I've done yoga and breath work, maybe some chanting. And I used to be one of those people who would say, you know, I just don't know how to, I don't know how to meditate. I can't do it. I can't sit still. And I just didn't know the techniques that I could apply to create the fertile ground for meditation to happen. So in meditation, what we're hoping for, what I'm sort of working towards always, is just presence and connection. Sometimes I'll be caught up in my mind and, you know, maybe a 40-minute session goes by and it's just, I know that it was a difficult meditation process for me. I couldn't really get out of my mind. I was a little stuck in some of my stories. I kept bringing doing the best to bring my attention back to my attention, to my beingness. But maybe it didn't go well that day, and that doesn't really matter. The continued practice and the steadiness of it is what matters. And it will absolutely, ultimately, put you into a new possibility, a new field of awareness. Like, the visual that helps me understand what I'm trying to say is, before I meditated ever, there was really only one sort of possibility for me. And let's just say that was sort of the default Tommy Rosen. Hyperactive, scattered, anxious, all those challenging things that led me to drink and use in the first place.
That antsy kind of energy and
not settled and not grounded. After meditation, I would say that there was the same door was available to me, but now there were more doors. I could still be unsettled, ungrounded, anxious. I could still be that default Tommy. That door is still available to me even now. But the new thing was, now there were 2 or 3 or 4 other doors to choose from with other possibilities. So the opportunities expanded. And, you know, that's a huge, huge statement right there. And so I say, you know, if you meditate, you'll have increased opportunity.
What does some of that look like for you?
Oh gosh, well, I just look at my life.
Yeah.
I mean, my whole life is an example of that. Speaking, writing, communicating from the heart, having some measure of clarity today, tapping into creativity, being connected to, you know, thousands and thousands of people all of whom I know and love and care about. That capacity was never, just wouldn't have been there before. Showing up for people, learning to be on time for things.
Mhm.
Basic, like those are like mundane things, navigating time and space much better is
Yeah.
part of it. And also new choices in my relationships, new ways of being there, new possible ways that you could react to another human being, whether that's positively or negatively. The end of, the relative end of codependency, still a work in progress, but all of those things and infinite creativity is now at my disposal because of yoga and meditation.
Right.
Primarily because of my recovery, my sobriety, my decision not to use drugs and alcohol any given day. And then the work of yoga and meditation, increasing one's awareness, one's consciousness, one's capacity. Sometimes people say to me, I just don't know how you do it. Really. And I'm not like trying to toot my own horn. People would say, I just don't know how you do it. You seem to do so much. And I say, well, sometimes I don't know how I do it either. And I get overwhelmed too. Sometimes I get anxious and stressed and all that too, because I've taken a lot on. The capacity that I have comes because of practice, because of my teachers, because of the teachings, because of steadiness, because of consistency.
Your ground is steady now.
Yeah, the ground is steady now. It doesn't mean life is all joyful all the time and that I'm free of any kind of struggles. I'm a human being,
Right.
subject to the human condition. But I love my life. I love this life. I'm so grateful for it. And I wouldn't have it any other way. I remember, of course, using drugs and alcohol in the insane way that I used to. But I just can't imagine going back. I can't begin to imagine what would have to happen in my life for that to take place. I don't say, oh, that could never happen. That would be arrogant. I would just say, it's just hard to envision today.
One of the things that my meditation teacher said once was, once you've reached a new level in your mind and in stability, that you kind of forget what it was like almost. It doesn't seem like possible to be back in that other level. It's just your whole being is shifted.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I feel like it's another person.
Yeah.
That was someone else.
So a minute ago, you said something about the decision to use or not. How would you work with that, with breathing and yoga, and how does that fit in on that kind of really practical level? Because we've been at a more deep, grounded shift of how would that work with someone who's craving whatever their substance is or their behavior?
If you're in a state of craving, one of two things is going to happen. You'll give in to the craving, or the craving will stop. It's very simple. The question is, how do you not get into a state of craving in the first place? And if you do find yourself in a state of craving, how do you get out of it as quickly as possible? If you're working at being sober, working at being clean, working at being present, developing yourself into a person who would and could navigate life without drugs and alcohol, and who looks at other addictive behaviors and works on those to move beyond those as well. If you're actively engaged in the process and you have a path to follow, a community that you're engaged with who also follow that same path, Sangha, sacred community. If you're working day to day and staying current and you're not getting away from yourself, I have found that cravings, if they come, they go pretty quickly. Especially if you talk to another person. If you try to hide a craving, it does not go well. It feeds it. The minute you share about it, its energy is diminished. Yoga and meditation build a person's capacity to resist temptation. But they also build these new possibilities that we were speaking about a moment ago, and new neural pathways where in situations where temptation or craving would arise, it arises less frequently. Less frequently. Once you're in craving, there are a few yogic techniques that you can do right on the spot and in the moment to remove craving in that moment. There's left nostril breathing. Just in and out through the left nostril only. Cooling, calming, lunar, feminine side. And 3 minutes of that, and I guarantee you will be in a different space than you were 3 minutes previous. There will be a shift for sure. There are other techniques, very simple, very accessible. But the thing about craving is we can't live there very long. It's overwhelming to the system.
Okay.
We'll become fatigued. You will give in one way or the other. You will make an action. You will take an action that either subsides the craving or succumbs to the craving. Kind of have two options there as far as I can tell.
Right. Our brains aren't really equipped to struggle with that for long periods of time.
No, and it's not enjoyable to be in a state of craving. Unrealized craving is painful. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Do you have a quote that you work from that's really meaningful for you?
A specific quote?
It can be more than one if you like.
On any particular topic?
Whatever you want.
Oh my goodness. Well, there's so many, you know. I love the work of Rumi and Hafiz, Yogi Bhajan, you know, Swami Rama, Rajmani Tuganayat, all these incredible teachers. One of my favorite quotes is by the great yogi Sri Ramakrishna. He said, "Pursue illumination like a person whose hair is on fire would pursue a pond." And I love that.
That's great.
And I would say it's perfect for recovery. Like anybody who's been caught in acute chronic addiction, the level and the lengths to which we would go to satisfy craving, like there are no bounds to it. I always say that people who struggle with addiction are the most creative people.
True.
To fulfill their craving, to fulfill their desire. The most incredibly creative people addicts are. And so that same creativity is available to you on a path of recovery.
Right.
The driver has to be there. Driver in addiction is obvious. It's the release of craving. That's what I'm after.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be in that state of satisfaction. I want the craving to be satisfied, my yearning, my longing to be satisfied. And I'll go to any length to get that. And if you treat recovery like that, you cannot fail. You cannot fail on this path. If you pursue your recovery like a person whose hair is on fire would pursue a pond. And I call that into my mind again and again and again and again. Like, to be that committed, to be that dedicated, that devoted to a path. How can you fail?
True. Well, and the stakes are that high.
Right.
Not just life and death in terms of overdose or something, but in terms of living this life that's just not as rich as it could be.
People would do well to imagine a space in their mind, like a visualization. You think of a really, really, really beautiful place, somewhere maybe you've been before, or a place that you imagine you could go. And it's filled with awe and wonder, vibrance, the radiance of nature, sounds and the smells, the flowers, the colors. You're in this incredible place. And in that place, as long as you're in that place, you're free of want. No more want. You just are. And there's nothing that you need to do. And there's nothing that you need to have. And you don't need to hang on to this place. It will always, always be there for you. Always. You can always visit again. To visualize that and to realize that that's what you can create in your life in all circumstances. You can create that kind of a paradise, a place that exists beyond want. Most people, if they begin to visualize that and really start to believe, could I really have that? God, I want that. I really, yes, I say yes to that. That's what recovery is.
Right.
And that's worth fighting for. That's worth struggling for. And that's worth all the challenge along the way. And addiction is just the opposite of that.
That's really something to sit with and be present with.
Yes.
It's that important.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't think we necessarily do enough of that kind of visualization. What are we after? Well, we're after something almost all the time. In our work, in our relationships, in our marriages, or seeking of money, or seeking of power, or seeking of sex, or seeking of something. And when do we get to just be? How much time, a good marker for me of how I'm doing in life. How much time do I spend each day, or how much time do I give myself each day to be free of doing, to be free of having, and to be free of wanting? That's a good question for us all. And let there be at least a few minutes every day where that's the case.
Yeah, at least a few. Yeah. So how could people get a hold of you? What's the best way to do that?
The best thing is to join our membership community at r20.com.
I'm a member of that too.
Thank you for joining. I hope you're having fun with it.
Definitely. Very worthwhile. Very worthwhile.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's just at www.r, the letter R, the number 2 and the number 0.com, r20.com. And we do live presentations 52 weeks of the year, every Monday night. We offer everybody a library of teachings so they can learn how to practice, meditate, and do yoga. Extensive 12-step conversations and library, smart recovery, refuge recovery, Y12SR, yoga, 12-step recovery. We honor all paths. Everybody's welcome. It's very inclusive and very optimistic community of people. So you come there and you can reach me through there, or just Tommy at r20.com. And I love to hear from everybody. If it takes me a minute to get back, don't take it personally. lots of communications going on, but we're really available in this community. We created it to be able to support the day-to-day needs of people in recovery and their families. So come and join us there.
Thank you so much for being part of this. We really appreciate that you take the time to do that. And the recovery work that you do is so meaningful and so inspiring as well. And to see you have gone from the life that you had to a life of service the way you have is a treat to see.
Thank you so much, Lynn. I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Go to KillibyCenter.com, Radical Recovery Summit, to see the full schedule of speakers and to register to watch these free online September 23rd and 24th in the Radical Recovery Summit 2017.